Welcome back to the show, everybody. Check out these headlines we have for you today. The petrodollar is dead. We got Brian Brooks talking about the US dollar-backed revolution. Come on in, baby. Somebody roll that beautiful intro.
Digital Perspectives with Brad Kimes. Come on in.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. You can follow us on Twitter and YouTube for exclusive content. Right now, cryptocurrency market cap is $1.22 trillion. We're off by 0.1%. Right now, Bitcoin is 29,000. Let me just freshen this up. It's been moving a little bit. Okay, it did move. So it's still $1.22 trillion market cap. The market is down by 0.2%. Right now, Bitcoin 29,500 plus, 1853 and change for Ethereum. The market cap for Tether is 83.4 billion plus. XRP is 63 cents. We're off by 4.5 on the 7-day, flat on the 24-hour. But I want to tell you about Glint, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, if you haven't taken advantage of this, please check it out. We are going to cover some information today about just what is happening on a geopolitical level and stage and how it could be so important for you to take advantage of something like Glint, where you can buy, save, send, and spend your own money through owning physically allocated gold through your MasterCard debit card. You can have your own personal alternative to banking, and there may be no greater time in history to have that than now. Link is underneath the video. Well, look who showed up to the party. Excuse me. It says growing institutional appetite for digital assets. You know, just in time for XRP legal clarity. How about that one, right? Look, I mean, I've said it before. I'm going to say it again very briefly. We got to move quick. We've got a lot of information to go over today, and it is powerful, I believe. But to me, when I look at this, I ask myself, if we're not going to get broad crypto legislation for the next 2 years to another administration's in, then, and it's quite likely, and if that is the case, then you're going to have a 2-year window where the appeals and this and that's going on with the Ripple case, but it doesn't change what the judge said in the dicta. And the dicta said that XRP in and of itself is not a security. And everything that they're talking about appealing on from the SEC side does not challenge that fact. So that would mean for the next 2 years that there will still be this vague ambiguity hanging over, uncertainty, all of the crypto space except for XRP. Let's get moving. We got a lot to do. We start right here with Raul Ivani. Shout out to Cypress to Monocore for this, talking about regulations in September 2023 on a global level. Take a quick listen.
On policy recommendations for crypto and digital asset markets. Additionally, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors are looking to establish standards for a global digital asset regulatory framework, and we expect initial proposals around September of 2023. So we expect that, the global regulatory bodies will continue to develop frameworks over the next year or so.
And we're looking forward to, shout out to Raul Ivani from Ripple for providing that information. But look, here's what we know. The big institutions are starting to get an appetite for digital assets. 45 countries on the geopolitical stage here prepare to join BRICS weeks before the summit. Listen, I don't believe that this is something that can be overstated. I want to highlight again that 23 countries that have formally applied to join BRICS, Saudi Arabia, which has the petrodollar agreement with the United States of America, which means Henry Kissinger went over there after we came off the gold standard and said simply, we're going to give you military protection if you do all your business in oil with the US dollar. That'll elevate the status and it'll help us even though we've come off the gold standard. That's what happened. Well, that's going to all change. And then there's these dramatic changes happening as well. This is food for thought from Gold Telegraph. UAE, who is a United States ally, right? Does the UAE want to join BRICS? The answer is yes. We've covered that as well. Whereas a significant amount of Russian gold been directed the United Arab Emirates. It says here, what else? The UAE and Chinese Air Force plan to train together for the first time later this month. The ruler of the UAE has visited Russia twice over the past year to meet the president there. The economy of the UAE is the fourth largest in the Middle East. In May, we learned that the UAE will no longer participate in operations by a U.S.-led task force protecting Gulf shipping. In June, it was revealed that the naval commander of Iran announced plans for a maritime alliance involving Iran, Saudi Arabia, India, Pakistan, and the UAE. This is what a changing world looks like, and it is happening much quicker than people think. I want you to listen to this clip here where Andy Schectman walks you through how Bretton Woods 1.0 was gold, Bretton Woods 2.0 was the petrodollar agreement, and Bretton Woods 3, well, here he goes right here.
Rapidly approaching Bretton Woods 3. Bretton Woods 1 is when the dollar was anointed the world reserve currency at the end of World War II in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, taking over for the pound sterling. Loosely, Bretton Woods 2 would have been when Nixon closed the gold window and when we struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom, Kissinger did, saying that we will protect you, and for that, you will denominate oil globally in dollars, you and OPEC. That was Bretton Woods 2. And that system is breaking, entering Bretton Woods 3, a system that he calls one that is backed by transparency and commodities, things that are immutable and verified. And much of what he is saying is exactly what you are saying is the perfect currency. And I couldn't agree with you more on all of this. And I think we are rapidly moving in that direction. The Bank of International Settlements, the group that reclassified gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset in 2019, also said that every country on the planet must have a operational CBDC by 2025. This is where we are going. And I think that, to ignore that and to not prepare for what it really means will be to your own detriment. And
I couldn't agree more. The first conversation I ever had with Big Skinny was a conversation about XRP was created to deal with the fact of the petrodollar and the death of the petrodollar. Yeah, imagine that. So what elevates the US dollar in a globally shifting world? Through the greatest financial paradigm shift in the history of mankind, what is the U.S. government going to do to continue to keep the strength in the U.S. dollar? Well, let's go here first. This is Brian Brooks on CNBC Squawk Box. I want you to listen to what he says about the importance of a stable coin for the U.S. dollar. Take a listen here.
Does this acknowledge then the shortfalls of cryptocurrency? I mean, this sort of was the case, the argument for Bitcoin. And now you're saying there's a real need for a stable coin pegged to the U.S. dollar as opposed to Bitcoin. Bitcoin was supposed to be the answer for exactly the case you laid out.
Well, and I would argue that Bitcoin being the number one performing asset in 2023 might actually vindicate that. I mean, for some reason, people keep declaring Bitcoin dead when, in fact, it's having, in any given year, a performance that's better than the S&P. That's a topic for a different day, probably. But what stablecoins are really about is just payment instruments, right? The idea is that stablecoins are a faster and essentially free internet-based way of holding and remitting money to people. And in the developing world, where it really matters how quickly inflation erodes your savings, matters a lot more than it does in the US, there's a demand for these products. That's a way for us to make the dollar relevant again at a time when governments around the world are looking to decouple from the dollar.
There we have it right there. That's from the former head of the Office of Comptroller of Currency for the United States of America. Happy Friday, right? Whether we like it or not, whether mainstream media is doing a great job or a crappy job, and it's a crappy job of covering this because they don't want to scare the hell out of everybody, is my guess. This is happening, right? The question is how do we get out of it? How do we come out the other side of this thing and the U.S. dollar not completely collapse? I want to touch on this very quickly here from John Kiff, who says today's FinTech Digest includes Bank of England reaching out to central bank digital currency advice for none other than Ripple. And it says, looks like Ripple is moving off the G20 blacklist. I say that's quite drastic. I don't think it's been on a blacklist. I think it's been on an NDA where we're just waiting for you to get legal clarity list. And guess what? We got it. If you want to know what the tectonic shift of the financial system looks like, Ripple moving off the G20 blacklist and onto the launch pad, that's what it looks like. And I have to say, that's what this feels like to me. We just had a day or so ago here the announcement that Ripple joins the BIS Cross-Border Payments Task Force. For what, you might ask? To sit on the Committee for Payments and Market Infrastructure. Okay? Not to change the trash in the offices. It's to sit on the Committee for Payments and Market Infrastructure. What do you think's going to happen? I know this. I know that there's a lot of people out here like, well, it didn't say XRP, so it's not going to use XRP. Those are the same people to me that will stand in a long line, and watch 15 people in front of them get smacked in the face and still think that they might not when it's their turn. You know, I can't help those people. I can bring them to the water, but I can't make them drink the water. You know what I mean? I can articulate the information, but I can't interpret it for them. That's where it stops. I'm at the edge of the ice. There it is. Free Tip Friday. There you go. There's only so many people we can reach. The rest got to stay outside. Here, right here, we see James Wallace. Here we see James Wallace. We've been covering this for a while, but think about it now. Ripple just joined the BIS task force, okay? And can I show you? This is what's happening, right? China's mBridge could challenge the dollar dominance in cross-border payments. We just had Brian Brooks, the former head of the OCC, tell us exactly what's going on here. This is what's going on, right? We see even more evidence. mBridge isn't a fancy tech term, talking about China, Thailand, Hong Kong, and the UAE. By the way, Thailand, Hong Kong, and the UAE, all working with Ripple, right? All of them. So, revolution cross-border payments using central bank digital currency, sidestepping the traditional dollar-dependent channels. There you have that. And then here's the reminder of what James Wallace, the head of central bank engagements for CBDC, says about mBridge. It is XRP Ledger, and XRP is one of the models being discussed for mBridge with the BIS, which they just joined.
Right, we're using the same technology that is with the XRP Ledger. The token would be the CBDC, right? So the central bank would actually create their own token, a digital euro, digital dollar, whatever the market is, and that becomes the digital asset.
So that becomes the digital asset. Keep listening.
The native coin.
The native coin, yeah. Now, where XRP could come into play potentially is when you're looking at cross-border CBDC. So when you have a digital dollar and you have a digital, real, or digital pound, you obviously need to have some way to interact cross-border. Yeah. So I think the BIS call this a multi-CBDC model. One of the ideas is you use a sort of a neutral bridge currency to go from one to the other, similar to the model I explained earlier, with our on-demand liquidity.
Then there you have it. He's walking you right down to it. There it is. Then there's David Schwartz just the other day, which we covered here, right? That absolutely went over the idea that two world reserve currencies can exist. And in fact, in history past, that's exactly how those things transition. For a time, it wasn't just one day that they said, we're using the US dollar, and then that's it. Everything else went away. They had that declaration in 1944, but there was still a period of transition between the pound and the US dollar, just as all the other currencies that served as a world reserve currency in the past. However, we got to remember that there is a moment coming now where the technology exists today to execute something similar to the Bancor coin, right? Where we could have a currency that no one controls, but everyone can take advantage of, and it doesn't challenge the dollars of the world or the sovereignty of any nation. That's what we're talking about here. So all of this is on the table, but I want you to hear this one time in the middle of this clip. Take a listen.
I do, and I think that could happen. I think it's quite realistic that a lot of the world is just done with the dollar as their reserve currency.
There you have
Like
it.
every nation would love for their currency to be the world reserve currency. That's helped the U.S., that's grown the U.S. economy, quote unquote, unfairly by leaps and bounds for decades. And every other country would be like, yeah, we'd like to have the world be the world's reserve currency. But the only countries that could possibly pull it off is the U.S. holding its position, maybe the EU, maybe Russia, maybe one or two others. But realistically, most countries know that if there's going to be a new world reserve currency that's a country's currency, it's not going to be them. And so they might actually prefer a currency that nobody can control to one that's controlled by their largest geopolitical rivals. And so that's like what I think is the biggest possible success scenario for digital assets. If these countries are like, okay, well, the US dollar can't hold on forever, but it's not going to be our currency because no one's going to want to repeat the US dollar scenario. Nobody but the EU wants the EU to replace the dollar, right? Nobody but Russia wants the ruble to replace the dollar. Nobody but China wants the yuan to replace the dollar. So maybe they could settle on a currency that nobody could control rather than one controlled by their most powerful geopolitical rival. So if you want a success scenario, that's the one that I think is the most likely.
But the more you get everybody to agree.
Right. How do you get everybody to agree to use it?
Well, I mean, they might agree if the alternative is that their geopolitical rivals force some new replacement for the dollar that's not, if they just replace, the old boss with a new boss. If the choice is no boss, if that happens to make a bunch of cryptocurrency people rich, I don't think they're going to see that as too much of a minus.
And how would you convince all the geopolitical players of the world, adversaries and friends, allies and enemies, to do that? How would you do that? How would you convince them that no boss is the best boss? Through pre-allocated option contracts, you give them some. That way they got a horse in the race. That's how. At least at my house, that's how. And I can tell you, if you can give them some, then you can also start having a very real serious conversation about those treasury bonds they're holding that will be falling in value. And maybe that could be the tipping point that says, you know what, I will take you up on that because I happen to hold a lot as a country of U.S. treasuries, that as this death of the petrodollar, announcement of Saudi Arabia joining BRICS, taking other dollars and pulling away from the U.S. dollar, all of it. This starts to have some very serious weight for a very real conversation about how you start to help this transition and strengthen the dollar, because you could also slingshot the weight of giving and allocating XRP to other countries to satisfy the notion that you won't have to trade an old boss for a new boss. There's going to be no boss, and we're all going to get a little bit of XRP, or a lot of it rather, right? And you'll be able to do what you need to do without having to be held captive to one country being the exalted world reserve currency. Now, the US dollar can win in the long term, because if you get all of those players involved, and just so happens maybe we find out that the US holds the largest amount of XRP, they could back the US dollar with it, couldn't they? And everybody wins. And what would be wrong with that? For the first time in the world, maybe everyone could win. Not financial advice from me or anyone else. I'll catch all of you on the next one.